In my newsletter commentary this week, I wrote about the new wave of pseudoscientific products and cures that have been just about everywhere the past few days. From injecting disinfectants to inserting UV light, neither of which could ever possibly work, to the bleach drink that one church in Florida has been selling, calling it a miracle mineral solution. The desire for instant answers is overwhelming. Talk of reopening, and even at least one state that has proceeded with that has exacerbated this. It seems that these days everyone is embracing pseudoscientific thinking. Pseudoscience is the reasonable sounding but dangerous twin of supernaturalism. Like supernaturalism, it emerges from magical thinking. Unlike the religious or spiritual types of magical thinking, pseudoscience, the science of snake oil salesmen, pretends it is real science. It is not. In some ways, those of us critical of religious magical thinking should be far more worried about pseudoscience because it affects us too. Those who choose to place their faith in God have always been at least a little aware that their versions of God and his superpowers don't always align with reality. That is why they freely acknowledge that sometimes their faith is really more of a leap of faith. But what are they leaping over? They're leaping over facts in evidence, not just scientific facts, but actual facts about their own lives. When prayers for healing are ineffective, and they are always ineffective, believers are forced to invent reasons for their failure. Those inventions are part of that leap. Someone is sick. Everyone prays for God to heal them. They die anyway, and, oh well, it was God's will. We cannot understand his mystery. We've all heard these justifications. Those are the leaps. As I wrote on Tuesday, humanists certainly have many beliefs, and one of these, it would not be incorrect to call it a faith, is in the power of science and medicine. But there is no leaping involved in our faith in science and medicine. For us, faith means proven trust, not assumed, not wished-for trust. Science and medicine have proven themselves. I mentioned in my newsletter commentary that I'm finishing up Rachel Kadish's novel, The Weight of Ink, about the small late 17th century Jewish community of London. When I got to the part about the summer of 1665, I was reminded about the Great Plague. During that pandemic, 1/4 of London's population died. And that wasn't even the worst outbreak of that particular plague. Earlier instances of what came to be called the Black Death killed off 1/3 to 1/2 of the populations where it broke out. In addition to completely useless pleas to God for these plagues to end, the means used to control them, quite unsuccessfully as it turned out, were basically all pseudoscientific guesses. That's why the Lord Mayor of London ordered all the cats and dogs killed. If he'd had any kind of real science, he would have known that the cats controlled the rat population that was helping to spread the plague. The science of disease transmission began to assert itself in the decade that followed the London outbreak, when a Dutchman named Antony van Leeuwenhoek, using a special microscope of his own design, discovered bacteria. Today, we call him the father of microbiology. His innovations ultimately led us to pretty much everything we know about epidemiology and many other branches of science. But I did say ultimately. The reason that pseudoscience continues to attract even people like us who love and accept medical science as the only path out of this mess is that we are hesitant to accept the downside. It takes a long time. This disaster is not like a hurricane that we could see coming and choose to prepare for or not, and then if hit, begin to emerge when it's over, to clean up, to rebuild. A pandemic is a slow-moving calamity that does not lend itself to quick answers, and whose end, while fully expected, is not yet known. Our modern mythos has led us to believe that science makes its greatest advances via eureka moments of great discoveries. It does not. Alexander Graham Bell did not deliver the telephone with one declaration of, "Mr. Watson, come here, I need you." It's not even clear that he invented it at all. Thomas Edison's mythology credits him with a lot of inventions, each of them evoking a kind of eureka imagery, rather than reflecting the painstaking work of researchers in his and others' labs over decades. In reality, few to none of the greatest modern scientific advances have been the result of a perfect one-time insight and experiment. They have actually been the result of a process of slow trials, errors, and corrections. This is even more true of medical science. In an article in The Atlantic that I've linked beneath the video, you have to push that little show more piece there, staff writer Ed Young discusses why the coronavirus is so confusing. He reminds us of the largeness of the problem at hand. There are a lot of moving parts. For example, scientists have noted that the virus is really hard to grow in cell cultures, making them harder to study. That the fatality rate is difficult to assess due to lags in testing. That the causes of death are hard to categorize because in some cases treatments are contributing to mortality. That the experimental medicines don't work the same on everyone and can work for some and harm others. And that the same may hold true for an eventual vaccine, meaning that we may need more than one for different populations. These are just a few examples of the complexity of the problems that scientists are trying to solve. None of this is comforting, except when we consider the alternative. Our faith in science and medicine is well placed and well deserved, but it requires us to fully understand it. As Young writes, this is how science actually works. It's less the parade of decisive blockbuster discoveries that the press often portrays, and more a slow, erratic stumble toward ever less uncertainty. Our understanding oscillates at first, but converges on an answer, says Natalie Dean, a statistician at the University of Florida. That's the normal scientific process, but it looks jarring to people who aren't used to it. Those with faith in God have thousands of years of experience in what to do when God fails to produce their desired outcome. They simply move the goalposts. Imaginary gods respond very well to imaginary changes and expectations. Those with faith in medical science are susceptible, though, to falling into the same trap. But neither our imaginations nor our desires can alter the methodologies of science. When we engage in pseudoscientific explanations or advice, regarding it as being, perhaps we think, based on the scientific method, we demonstrate our misunderstandings of that process. This is because we want our new faith to reassure us the way that the old faith in God once did. But that is not the job of medical science. The job of medical science is to mitigate and to cure. And with a brand new pathogen, that takes time and patience. As The Atlantic also noted, citing Dr. Thomas Inglesby of the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, the impulse to be reassuring is understandable, but the most important thing is to be as accurate as possible. We should give people, he says, information so they can do what they think is right. We should tell people what we don't know and when we'll know more. So can medical science reassure us at all? Well, yes, if we're willing to accept it on its own terms. Its own terms demand an incredible amount of patience. More patience than we social creatures trapped in our homes and getting understandably antsy might feel that we have the ability to demonstrate. Even members of our own community have said to me in recent weeks, "I'll be glad when July comes and we're out of this." We're not going to be out of this in July. The rate of infections and deaths has only begun to flatten because we're doing what we're doing. If we stop doing it, they will rise. Does that mean we won't be able to slowly return to some normal activities? Maybe a few. It's hard to say. It's not my field. The science of the disease is such that we now know more about how it is transmitted, so possibly, depending upon our own levels of risk and that of the people we're connected to, we might decide to alter some responses in some small ways. In Michigan, we can get our lawns mowed now, so there's that. But older and at-risk individuals shouldn't plan on trips to the theaters, museums, or mall anytime soon. The bottom line for all of us to remember is that medical science is hard at work, but that science does not work on our preferred schedule. To be effective, it must proceed methodically, and that takes time, which requires our patience. As humanists, right now, this is the most realistic idea and the best reassurance that we have to offer ourselves and one another. Forbearance, restraint, patience. Let us draw from each other to cultivate these qualities, doing all that is in our power to stop the spread of this virus.